The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. We're just going to wait a couple minutes for other folks to hop on and we'll get started shortly. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to a Newcomer's Guide to a Behavioral Health Crisis webinar here with Matt Hardin. Before we get started, I just want to introduce the program of Empower Idaho. For those of you that aren't familiar, we are an organization located in Boise, and we offer education advocacy for adults with behavioral health conditions in Idaho. So again, we have our wonderful presenter here, Matt Hardin, who is the Executive Director of the Southeast Idaho Behavioral Health Center in Pocatello. We also have Fran, our ASL interpreter, present with us today as well. Just a couple of housekeeping comments. If you would like to make your screen bigger for Fran, just to be able to view it a little bit better, you can hover over her photo and there is these arrows that are on the bottom right corner, and that'll expand her screen. Okay. And so with that said, a couple of more comments on the instruction and guidance for the control panel. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you're more than welcome to insert that in the questions panel there. And we will bring those questions to the attention of Matt, the presenter, to get those questions answered for you. Just so you know, everybody is on mute, but if you use the raise hand function, we'll be able to unmute you as appropriate, so we could have that opportunity for that engagement. We also have the chat box function at the very bottom of the control panel, where you can also include any comments, questions if you don't want to use the questions panel. But that's essentially how you can navigate that control panel. One last thing, in the handouts dropdown, you can access a PDF version of these slides. So feel free to open that up and follow along as Matt goes through everything. So I'll go ahead and let you take over, Matt. Thank you so much for presenting.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So again, my name is Matt Hardin. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor. I've been doing mental health and substance use treatment in Idaho for the last 8 or 9 or so years. And then the last few years, I came on as we opened up the crisis center here in Pocatello, and I've been doing that the last few years. I love working with Empower Idaho. This is my second presentation with them, and so thank you so much to Alejandra and Anna as well, and thank you to Fran for joining us for this one. I'm excited to present. This is a brand new presentation for me. I talk about crisis. I've been educating in my community about how to work within a crisis, and so this presentation has been a lot of fun to put together because this is an idea of how can we kind of broaden the idea of how to manage a crisis and help somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of education or information on what behavioral health is, what it looks like, and those types of things. And so this is a really, hopefully basic, really easy to follow presentation. And again, if you have any questions, or if I throw out a term that you don't understand, or if there's anything in there that I gloss over, feel free to put something in the chat box or ask a question. We can make sure we hit that as we go through this. We will be talking about a few sensitive issues, so there will be a little bit of talk about suicide in here. If that's a trigger to you at this point in your life, always feel free to step away. Your health and your safety is definitely number one, and not that this gets into too much detail, but just a little warning about the presentation. So. All right, so basic outline of what this presentation is going to look like. We have our bullet points here. So number one, what does behavioral health mean? What does that term behavioral health mean? Why bother with behavioral health? What's the big point? Why is it a big deal? How do I recognize a crisis? Can I even do anything to help? And is it safe to help somebody that's in a crisis? How to respond to a crisis? And then hopefully if we can get somebody into treatment, does treatment actually work? So those are hopefully the 6 things that we can really hit on today. And I hopefully can educate, and hopefully we'll have about 10 or so minutes at the very end to answer any questions for those that we don't get through during the thing. So number one, so what is behavioral health? So behavioral health consists of 2 different things. Number one is mental health. And so our mental health, some of the more well-known mental health disorders, anxiety, bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, OCD, those types of things that we hear a lot about. Maybe we don't fully understand, but at least we can kind of understand what they are. And the statistics are typically 50% of individuals struggling with a mental health disorder also has a substance use disorder. So that's one side of behavioral health. And so the other side of behavioral health is the substance use side of things. And again, 50% of individuals with a substance use disorder has a mental health disorder as well. And so when we talk about substance use, it's things like alcohol, illicit drugs. In our community here in Bannock County in Southeast Idaho, we have seen, like across the country, an uptick in opioid use, a lot of heroin, prescription pill use, methamphetamine, alcohol, or abusing over-the-counter drugs. So those are the 2 major components of behavioral health. We use the term behavioral health because it encompasses everything. If we just say mental health, we're really kind of leaving substance use out of it because only 50% have that SUDS aspect of it. And if we only talk about substance use, we're kind of leaving out the mental health. So behavioral health is this all-encompassing kind of term to talk about when we're addressing these 2 different issues, which different but very similar. So why bother with behavioral health? So the myth or some of our mentality sometimes in our society is that mental healths don't affect me. I don't struggle with depression, or I don't have bipolar, or I don't have a substance use issue, so it's not my problem, is a pretty typical kind of mindset to have. However, the statistics, again, 1 in 5 adults experience a mental health issue. 1 in 10 teens experience a period of major depression, and 1 in 25 adults live with a serious mental illness, whether it's schizophrenia, bipolar, or major depression. So if you know 5 adults, if you know 10 teenagers, if you know 25 adults, there's a really, really good chance that mental health does affect you, or that behavioral health does affect you in some way. Maybe not you personally, but a loved one, a neighbor, somebody that you work with. Most of us know more than 25 people, and so mental health definitely affects all of us. Suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death in ages 10 to 34, and the 4th leading cause of death between the ages of 35 to 54. And so again, if you have lost somebody in your life between the ages of 10 to 34, you know, there's a good possibility that you lost that individual to suicide, which is unfortunate. And then the 4th leading cause between 35 and 54 as well. And then 10% of US adults have a drug use disorder at some point in their lives. We've seen a little bit of an uptick with this with COVID over the past year and a half. We've seen substance use increase a little bit. Access to treatment went way down. Access to treatment changed as far as it went to online treatment, which the treatment industry, the counseling agencies have used kind of telehealth, but it's still kind of new in the treatment community, and so we had to adapt really quickly. But again, in 10 people, one out of 10 are going to struggle with a substance use disorder at some point in their lives. So again, if you know more than 10 people, there's a good chance you know somebody that has struggled with a substance use disorder. And the real downer to that whole thing is that 75% of those individuals report never receiving treatment, which is really unfortunate, whether it's a stigma to reach out for treatment or not knowing where to get treatment. There's a lot of different reasons why individuals do not seek treatment, but we need to get that number down and really open up treatment centers to help individuals. All right, so hopefully we've been able to answer at least the first 2 outlines, bullet points. You know what behavioral health is, and that it does affect you in some way, whether it's, again, you personally, family members, loved ones. But what does it look like? What does a behavioral health crisis look like is the big question, right? So again, I come from a clinical background, and I've been working and treating a lot of these mental health and substance use disorders for a little bit of time. And so when I'm talking to an audience that maybe doesn't have the clinical background, I've really tried to come up with a way of how can I get my Uncle Joe that works I don't know, in the serving industry, how do I get him to recognize a mental health crisis or a substance use crisis without trying to give him a clinical background or some of those things? How do I do that? And so if you look at this wheel, if you can see the wheel, these 6 things, again, these are some of the more common, more prevalent mental health and substance use disorders: depression, psychosis, drug use, suicide, mania being the opposite polar of depression when we talk about bipolar, and anxiety. All 6 of these things have a few things in common that are really non-clinical, that I believe that anybody can really identify if you're close enough to the individual, if you have a relationship with somebody, whether it's a working relationship or a personal relationship. So these things in the middle, these are all things that as a clinician, I would look at as well next to some of the clinical sides of some of these disorders. And so we're talking about our sleeping patterns, our ability to concentrate, what does our social life look like, our appetite, our weight gain or weight loss, and our hygiene habits. With depression, individuals can sleep constantly, or they can not sleep at all. The ability to concentrate is incredibly difficult. Social life, somebody experiencing major depression will typically, can stay at home, avoid social opportunities. Appetite, it can go either way. Sometimes there's a loss of appetite and sometimes there's an increase in appetite. And so that weight gain, weight loss, a pretty typical clinical question that I would ask is, have you gained or lost 10 or 15 pounds without even trying? And that's a good way that as a clinician that I would adjust and really identify if there's been an issue with the weight. And hygiene, not wanting to brush teeth, not wanting to get up and change or shower, those types of things. And these 6 items in the middle, really you can see anybody struggling with any of these things on the outside. These are the types of things that you can notice as a non-clinician. And so really, if we want to recognize a crisis, we need to recognize the routine. And so if we are talking about a loved one in your life, maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a child, a cousin, a grandma, maybe it's a neighbor that you're really close with, maybe it's somebody that you work with, we can typically identify these things in those individuals. And not that one of these, right, if they're sleeping bad for a week, that means that they're struggling with their depression or they're contemplating suicide. It's really a culmination of these things. They tend to piggyback off of each other, but at least these things should start throwing off warning sirens in your head or raising red flags of, hey, I noticed this, and I noticed this, and I noticed this. All right, that's 2 or 3 things, and that should really start setting off some warning bells and really kind of triggering in your own head that, hey, maybe I need to ask a question, maybe I need to reach out to this individual, really see where they're at in their lives and see if there's something that I can do to help. And so at the Crisis Center, this is a situation that I see pretty often. And so this is a crisis arc example of some of the things that we just saw in that circle. And so as we look at the arc, we can see at the very bottom left, we may have a stressor. Maybe it's a conflict at work, a conflict in the relationship at home, something that triggers suicidal thinking. And this individual may have anxiety, depression, and maybe they don't have either of those things. But there is a stressor that triggers suicidal thinking. And then again, we start to see some of these basic routines start to dwindle and start to decay a little bit. And so the individual with the suicidal thinking, some of the escalation with suicidal thinking is beginning to devise a plan on, all right, if I'm going to end my life, how am I going to do it? And that's kind of that first step into the progression of suicidal thinking. And so the first step, beginning to devise a plan. And if they're starting to think of a plan, they're going to avoid family, friends, those types of situations as they become kind of lost in this thought and this repetitive thinking of what the plan's going to be. Substance use can start to happen, which then will start trouble sleeping. So their sleeping schedules is off, they're increasing their substance use. If their plan is to start stockpiling medication, maybe their plan is to OD on maybe some overdose on their medication that they currently have. And then they get, when they decide to act on their plan, they may call someone to say goodbye, they may start giving away possessions, those types of things. And then at the pinnacle of that crisis arc, they're ready to take the medication. And hopefully, again, there's an interruption that takes the individual's mind off of what the plan is, whether that's a phone call, it could be a certain song on the radio. The interruption can really be anything when it comes to somebody in a suicidal crisis. But really, just that first part of the arc is really what I want to hit on right now, is that we can see withdrawing socially, trouble sleeping, increasing substance use, stockpiling medication. If you are in a relationship or if you're close to somebody, these are things that you can see as a non-professional, as These are not clinical things that you need the years of training that I've had. Anybody can recognize these things, and if you are recognizing these, then again, those warning signs should go off, and you should intervene. And we can talk about, and we will talk about how to intervene a little bit later. But asking those questions, hey, how you doing? I noticed this, this, and this. You know, what can we do? What can I do to help? And so then on the back side of the arc, we have the interruption, hopefully, which leads to an intervention, and then a willingness to engage into long-term treatment to hopefully help with some of those things at the beginning of the crisis arc. So hopefully this presentation is a straight and linear and straight shot and on the outline, but there are two tangents that I want to go on just really quick. As we talk about crisis, this is really kind of in a general way, but there are 2-3 things that I really want to hit on really quick to talk about, because they are important, and they kind of require their own hour, 2-hour kind of presentation on what to look at and how to intervene and those types of things. But number one is an overdose with opioids. This is a serious issue that affects all of us. And I just wanted to point out some of the unique signs of an overdose on opioids real quick, and something that you can do to have with you and a way to intervene on those things. So the first one is an overdose on opioids, whether that's heroin or prescription pills. These are the types of signs that somebody is going through an overdose. And so opioids are a suppressant, they're a depressant, and so they slow down the body's natural process of functioning, right? And so as we can see these things, you can see that it is just the body slowing down. So loss of consciousness, unresponsive to outside stimulus, and so not being able to, you ask a question, unresponsive, or you touch them, maybe they respond, kind of that delayed response, awake but unable to talk. Breathing is very shallow, slow, erratic, or has stopped. For lighter skinned individuals, the skin tone turns bluish or purple. For darker skinned individuals, the skin turns grayish or ashen. Again, that blood flow is slowing down, and so we're seeing the skin tone turn different colors. Choking sounds or snore-like gurgling sound, and so that automatic swallowing and breathing that we do automatically is slowed down. Vomiting, body is very limp, face is very pale or clammy, fingernails and lips turn blue or purplish, black, and then again the pulse, heartbeat is slow, erratic, or not there at all. If you notice somebody that is experiencing these things, call 911 right away. There is something that you can, if there's somebody in your life, a loved one that is currently using opiates, you can get Narcan or naloxone, which is a medication that can be administered by anybody. It used to be a shot that you give somebody, but it has now comes in a plunger that you give straight to the nozzle, to the nose. And so like an inhaler, you place it in their nose and you squeeze it in their nose, and it reverses the effects of an overdose. And it kind of brings them out, hopefully immediately. It can take 2 or 3 doses of Narcan, but Narcan is saving individuals' lives. It's safe to have. A lot of the treatment centers, the crisis center, the recovery centers in our communities will hand these out. We give them out to anybody and everybody that we can think of. You can have it in your purse, you can have it in your home, and it is reversing overdoses and again saving individuals' lives. And so if there's somebody in your life, this is something that Narcan or naloxone to have on hand is super important. The second thing, and these are again crises that don't necessarily kind of fit, but something that I wanted to hit on really quick. The second thing is trafficking within the U.S. I know there's been movies out there and we think that it's maybe in other countries, but 50,000+ individuals are trafficked within the United States every year. And so knowing how to identify trafficking can save lives. This is not my area of expertise. This comes from a training that I went through through the Fort Hall Casino here in my community. Invited me to come to a training that they had. An FBI agent from Texas who is an expert on this gave a whole day presentation on how to identify and these things. And so this comes from his presentation. And again, much like the previous slide, not one of these markers means that somebody's being trafficked. These need to come in succession. Again, many of these need to start turning warning sirens on in your head, raising some red flags. And his response to, if you identify these things, who do you contact? And he educated us to call local law enforcement, and then they will contact the appropriate authorities. And so some of these things, the social, physical, and other identifiers on trafficking. And so when it comes to trafficking, there's typically, it's not always, but typically it's a male who is in the dominant position and a female who is in the submissive position. And so avoiding eye contact, social interaction, and authority figures, seeming to adhere to a script or rehearsed response. So again, if this is a young female who is being trafficked, she's going to avoid eye contact, social interaction. She's given a script on what she can and can't say. This is very much a power situation where she's unable to do a lot of the things that, like speaking out or getting help, appearing destitute, lacking personal possessions, referring to the male as a boyfriend or daddy, not allowing people to go into public or speak for themselves. Right, there's no independence. It's very much a power situation, power relationship. Physical appearances, appearing malnourished, showing signs of physical injuries or abuse. Again, lacking possessions, poor physical or dental health. Tattoos, branding, or untreated sexually transmitted diseases. On the other side, or other category, doesn't have possession of their own identification documents. Again, the individual in the power position is not allowing the individual to have personal possessions, ID. That way the individual is totally reliant on that individual. Checking into hotels or motels with older males. And then these last four really pertain to labor trafficking. And so there's sex trafficking, I think, is what we typically think about when we hear trafficking. But then there is labor trafficking, which is essentially modern day slavery, individuals that are forced to work. And so the four signs there: working excessively long hours, living at the place of employment, small children serving in a family restaurant, or security measures that appear to keep people inside an establishment, barbed wire, inside of a fence, those types of things. The small children serving inside of a family restaurant, again, being in a smaller community, right? We have a lot of family restaurants and the kids may help out on the weekend, those types of things. Again, I want to make sure that we know that not one of these things means that this is what's happening, but just really kind of a checklist. And you can start noticing these types of things, then you know, the warning siren should go off in your head and reach out. So the third thing, and I don't have a slide that I probably should have, is some of the major suicide identifiers, like giving away possessions, making a phone call, you know, some of those things. And I probably should have had a slide. There is a training, and if we could put that in the chat, it's called QPR, so question, persuade, and refer. It's about an hour training. It can be done online, or you can do it in person. But it's an hour training on how to identify suicidal thinking and planning, and how to persuade the individual to seek help, and then how to refer them to appropriate referrals. I'm trained to do that as well. And so if that's something that you would like training in, at the very end, it has my email. Feel free to reach out, or you can go onto QPR's website. I think it's the QPR Institute, and you can put your location in, and it should give you a list of trainers in your area that can do that. And so, yeah, and all of these could warrant their own giant training, but for the sake of time, this is kind of a brief overview on how to intervene. All right, so back on track. Those were my 2 tangents, but back on track with the rest of the training. So now that you know that you need to spot changes in the routine, but what can you do, and can you do anything about it? And is it safe to do something? So myth, I can't do anything for a person with a mental health problem. So fact, friends and loved ones can make a big difference. Only 44% of adults with a diagnosable mental health problem and less than 20% of children actually receive needed treatment. So number one, we're not even addressing the issue on a scale that we should. Oh, whoa. I forget the statistic, but I know that in treatment, when I was in private practice, if I could get at least one person, whether it was a loved one, a parent, a friend, if I can get one more person to join us in treatment for one session, just to share some ideas, bounce some ideas, get somebody involved, the rates of therapy working skyrocket. It's not a solo mission when it comes to treatment, but just being involved in somebody's life that is struggling with these things makes a huge difference. So again, back to this circle and identifying these areas in which we can all identify, even within ourselves, if we struggle with these things, these can be the first red flags in your own mental well-being. So before, to recognize the crisis was to recognize the routine. So in order to help somebody, again, in a non-clinical way, not everybody out here is a clinician, right? And so what can you do to help? Well, if you recognize the routine, the best thing that you can do, if it's a super non-emergency, right? If they're talking about ending their lives, obviously 911 is the way to go. But if you're identifying these things, then you can help reestablish the routine. If somebody's having trouble sleeping, if hygiene is an issue, if weight is up and down, if somebody that you typically hang out with is now kind of dodging calls, those types of things, identify those areas, talk to the individual, and just try to help establish those things. That is the beginning of that arc, and that arc can be much smaller. We don't have to go all the way to the pinnacle of somebody attempting on their lives, or they don't have to go through a major depressive episode every single time. If we can identify those things and get those things back on track, even if it is sleeping and eating and a social life, just doing those 3 things can really curb that arc. And so it's more of a minor speed bump and not a major roller coaster ride in that individual, and that it won't interfere with their lives. They won't lose their job. They won't lose relationships. They won't have that attempt on their lives. And it's much less harmful to the individual and the family as well. And so it seems super simple, but it works. And I'll get into that a little bit more, how I know that works for sure. So another myth, again, is it safe to intervene if somebody is experiencing these types of things? And so here's a myth: individuals suffering from a mental illness are violent or will snap at any moment. I really enjoy watching movies and TV when they talk about mental health and those types of things. However, they tend to take very small portions of it and blow it up like they do most with a lot of different things. but I think we see this in movies a lot, right? That the individual schizophrenia is dangerous, and don't approach them, and those types of things. When in reality, 3 to 5% of all violent acts across the entire United States are attributed to mental health. And so that is such a small percentage of violent acts in our nation attributed to mental health. And so not to say that it's a completely safe and 100% safe and that you should always approach somebody, because there always is that potential that something could go wrong, but hopefully this helps understand what that percentage actually is. And on the reverse side, individuals struggling with their mental illness are actually 10 times more likely to be a victim of a violent act, or being taken advantage of, being scammed, those types of things. And so hopefully that helps clear that up a little bit. So, how to respond to a crisis. So some basic communication. And so before we saw this arc, and this arc is super important. Earlier, the example was suicidal thinking. And so this may be more of a road rage, somebody that struggles with their anger. And so again, that stressor that starts this escalation off, maybe an individual's fired from work. Now they're anxious about the future. I just lost my job. What am I going to do? So they withdraw socially. They increase their substance use. Their sleeping is erratic. The financial stress starts piling on. They get cut off in traffic. They're shouting, and then that leads to them lashing out physically. And so if we were looking at this arc, we can see the behaviors, but really we need to kind of strip that away and kind of look at what the mental health behind that is. And so if we look at the same thing, we are looking at anxiety, somebody becoming defensive, the harmful behavior at the very, very pinnacle of the crisis arc, and then the outlet. And so these are 4 things that we really need to look at when somebody is in a crisis, and identify or how to identify where somebody is in this arc, and then how and what your response can be to that individual. So this is kind of a busy slide, but again, at the very top, we have the anxiety, we have the defensive, and the harmful behavior, and then the outlet. And so in the road rage situation, we have the anxiety, right? The individual is anxious about the future, and he withdrew from his social life. Then we have the defensive behavior, which was his shouting. Then we have the harmful behavior at the very top, which was the assault. And then the outcome of that, nobody can be that angry all the time, or if somebody's suicidal, there's always that outlet afterwards. And so then at the bottom half of that, we can look at what those stages look like, kind of in a general way. In that example, hopefully you can see where the anxiety, the defensive, and the harmful behavior are. But in a general sense, anxiety, that's really when we see that first change in behavior, right? We all have our own baseline of how we feel and act every day. If we have a job interview, or if I have a presentation like today, right? The first 10, 15 minutes before the presentation, first 10, 15 minutes of the presentation, my anxiety is a little elevated. And so there's a little bit of change in behavior. I switch my chair out. Typically I have my work chair, but I tend to swivel when I'm anxious. And so when I'm presenting, I swivel back and forth, and then that makes me like seasick and I get nauseous. And so I have to sit in a regular chair. So that's my own anxiety. That's my own change in behavior that I have to pay attention to. But pacing, withdraw, just notice those things in yourself, and you can start to notice those things in other individuals. And if you see somebody starting to do those things, the best response can be, or should be, support. Empathetic, non-judgmental, listen and allow time. If we're going to sit down and talk to somebody about their anxiety, about the change in behavior, we better have the time to sit and actually listen to their response. my chair sitting in the swivel, if I'm anxious and I'm swiveling in the chair and I get the response back from a coworker of, knock it off, don't sit in there, you're making me anxious, right? That's not, I need support. I need, hey, you look anxious. Why are you're swiveling? What's up? What can I do to help out? We can listen and allow time, because in the anxiety stage, we're still rational. We can still think things through, and we still have that time to process. When somebody gets into the defensive stage, we're starting to begin to lose rationality, and that's when we start to see things like shouting, refusal to listen. At the crisis center, individuals start telling us, you're not helping me, you're not doing anything, you're against me, you're not doing what I want you to do, and just getting real defensive in those ways. And so when somebody gets to that point, because they are beginning to lose rationality, we need to be very simple in our directions. So 2 to 3 word sentences, setting limits. Joe, I need you to sit down. Joe, I need you to step outside. Joe, I need you to lower your tone. Very super simple. If you can't lower your tone, we're going to ask you to leave. And just repeating those things, just super simple. Again, beginning to lose rationality. We're past being able to sit down and rationalize with somebody in this stage. And again, we can shorten these curves if we approach somebody in the defensive stage with those direct limits. If we can get them to sit down, have a drink of water, then we can get back to the anxiety stage, and then we can allow time and we can listen to what's going on. If they escalate above the defensive stage to the harmful behaviors, that's when they tend to be harm to themselves or others. They're hitting, throwing things, a risk to themselves or others, contemplating suicide or explaining the plan that they have. This is when it can become dangerous to engage. And so if somebody's in this is a 911 call 100% of the time. In our center, at the crisis center, this is when we would call local law enforcement and have them come. If somebody's throwing a chair or if somebody is becoming physical, that's when we reach out as well. We try to isolate the situation. We get everybody else to a safe environment. And so if you work at a bank, or I give this presentation similar to a library, and so try to get the individual to one spot in the library, get everybody else to a safe place, disengage, don't intervene, and call your local law enforcement and have them come and help out. No matter where you're at on the curve, the outlet is always there. And that's that decrease in energy, crying, apologizing, things like, I'm so sorry, I don't know what got into me, I don't know why I shouted at you, I can't believe I threw that book across the room, I'm just so upset with myself. And just that outlet, right? This is typically repression, and then the explosion, and then just that outlet of emotion afterwards. And this is really where we can get somebody to kind of have that light bulb moment, that aha moment of, hey, I really need to change something in my life. I need to re-engage in treatment, or I need to get back on my medication, or I need to communicate my feelings more often, those types of things. That outlet is a really powerful moment where we can really get individuals re-engaged with treatment or those around them. Again, this is a super simple explanation of this. This is a very small piece of CPI training. So Crisis Prevention Institute, they do a 2-day training, and this is just a very small piece of their training. It's a 2-day training used in many different mental health hospitals, just basic de-escalation skills. Again, you can look that up if you are interested in doing that for your own agency, or perhaps your work or whatever. Again, super simple, but this I think is a way that we can all identify where somebody's at, how to intervene, and when not to intervene, and to reach out to that next level of care. So then if we help somebody through a crisis, if we talk to them, we're able to get them into treatment or talk to them about treatment, does treatment actually work? And so the myth, there is no hope for people with mental health problems. Once a family or a friend or family member develops mental health problems, he or she will never recover. And so just in the way that that's stated, it's really tricky because some of these things like schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, bipolar, some of these chronic conditions are chronic, and they will be there through the lifetime. However, the key term is recover. Because studies show that people with mental health illnesses get better, and many recover completely. But again, recovery is the big word. Recovery refers to the process in which people are able to live, work, learn, and participate fully in their communities. Somebody with schizophrenia can function on their own. They can live independently. Somebody with bipolar can learn to manage their ups and downs, their peaks and their valleys, along with medication and strict behavioral management and their schedules, sleeping schedules, eating schedules. There are more treatment services and community support systems than ever before out there, and they really do work. It's just key to have that support. And so how do I know that that identifying the routine and reestablishing the routine helps individuals? Well, the reason I know that is because that's exactly what we do at the Crisis Center every single day. We average 6 to 7 individuals in the building every single day, and our #1 intervention is to get people to sleep 8 hours a day, get them to eat 3 meals a day, socialize with my staff, shower, get into clean clothes. And if I can do that with an individual that came in for suicidal ideation or depression, anxiety, substance use, if I can just do those things for 2 or 3 days, they are feeling so much better, and we have avoided a major crisis. And so it does work, and I see it, and we do it every single day. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so this is Maslow was a psychologist in the 40s and 50s, and he came up with this hierarchy of needs, and it's the idea that in order to reach our peak humanness, to be the best person that you can possibly be, he calls it self-actualization. In order to reach that point in your life, you have to have some basic needs met. Like #1, we have to have our physiological needs met. We need to have food, we need to have water, we need to know where we're gonna sleep, we need to be able to use the restroom. Those things, we have to be breathing, right? Those needs have to be met before we can even worry about friendship, family, some of those things. If I don't know if I'm gonna eat, it's harder to worry about my finances, right? And so the next rung is safety. I need to know that I'm gonna be safe where I'm living, sleeping. I need to feel safe in my job, with my relationships, and with my health. And so if those first 2 rungs can be met, then the individual can reach those next rungs up. And so again, at the Crisis Center, or if somebody's in crisis, helping them reestablish those pieces in the pyramid will then help the individual reach those other levels. And again, we do this every single day at the Crisis Center. Yeah. So I just have 2 more slides, I believe 2 more slides, and then we can open it up for questions. I think we have about 10-ish minutes. So taking care of yourself. And so again, we talk about helping others in a crisis and helping others, all of this others, but I really want to focus on everyone that's here. I think we have 32 people here in this presentation, and so I want to identify self-care versus self-soothing. We talk about self-care all the time. What are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing to take care of yourself? But there's a really big distinction between self-care and self-soothing. When we talk about self-care, somebody may say, oh, well, I took a bubble bath and I had my favorite ice cream, and then I sat down and watched my favorite TV show after a hard day. You know, those are great things to have to help come down after a long, hard day. It's safe, not super, right? It's not addictive, those types of things, but those things are really classified as self-soothing, right? We're soothing ourselves, we're coming down from a stressful day. But when we talk about self-care, self-care is really, what are you doing now that may be difficult that will make your long-term self much better, right? And so when we talk about self-care, we're talking about our eating habits, our exercise habits, our spiritual habits, our mental health habits, and those things are hard to do on a daily basis, but in the long term, they will benefit us moving forward. And so it's the exercise that we hate doing every single day, but we know that in the long run, it's going to benefit us 100%. That's self-care. And so to make sure that you have a self-care plan and a self-soothing plan is super important, but I really just wanted to identify that those are two completely different things. And along with that, it's just being the best you. And so Malcolm Gladwell came out with a book a while ago called Outliers, and just looking at what makes professional athletes, why are they so much better than amateur athletes or some of those things. And so one of the things that he talked about is the professional athletes have at least 10,000 hours of deliberate practice in whatever their sport they're in. He talks about Wayne Gretzky. You know, why is he the best hockey player? Why is he so much better than everybody else? And so it's just that 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. And so as we talk about self-care, we can identify that those hours that we are putting into ourselves over the next 15 to 25 years, if you're putting an hour or so a day into your self-care, you'll reach those 10,000 hours. You know, your hobbies, your exercise, your mental health, your spiritual health, all of those different things, putting those hours in the next 15 to 25 years, you're going to be above where you could be if you weren't doing these things at all. So invest in yourself. I know physical health, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Mental health, challenging yourself, whether it's learning a new language, you know, reading. Spiritual health doesn't always mean religion. It can be your own spiritual practices, but anything that you are doing to invest in yourself is super important. But yeah, so that's the presentation. We can open it up for questions. That's my email. That's my work email. So feel free, again, some of the QPR training I do as well. Typically, we want a big group, 10 individuals, in order to make a QPR training possible. But if you have questions about mental health or anything like that, let me know. And then at the end of the slides, of course, we have our sources for some of the material that I talked about. But I'll leave it on this slide so you can grab my email if you'd like, and we can open it up for questions if there are any.
All right, and I have everybody muted, and so I'm going to click to unmute everyone, and it'll prompt you whether or not you want to accept to be unmuted, but that way it'll allow you to be able to access your microphone to verbally ask questions. Right. And thank you again, Matt, for this wonderful and informative session. I also want to know if anybody comes up with or has any questions that they think of afterwards. As Matt stated, you can always email him and also email our team, and we can direct that to Matt as well. In addition to that, again, all still welcome to ask questions. But I will also be sharing the link to sign up for the Empower Idaho newsletter and for our upcoming event next week for the Southeastern Idaho Peer Support Connection Conference. So that'll be in the chat box. But again, you're more than welcome to ask those questions. Okay. So I think if there aren't any questions, we are all set to wrap up. Thank you, Fran, for interpreting for us, and again, Matt, for this fantastic session. Just so you all know, this session is recorded and will be uploaded to our website if you want to access it afterwards. Again, there was a question in the chat box about certificate of attendance. You are more than welcome to email our team if that is something that you are interested in. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat box. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
So, thank you.